IGCSE and O-Level Smart Biology M. Rashid Chatter 030046100457. 3. Movement into and out of cell. Diffusion is the random movement of molecules of liquid, gas, or dissolved solid. The molecules of a substance diffuse from a region where they are very high concentrated to a region where they are less concentrated. Kinetic energy of molecules and ions results in their diffusion. Substances may enter cells through the cell membrane by simple diffusion or active transport. The rate of diffusion is affected by surface area, temperature, concentration gradient, and distance. Water has several roles as a solvent in organisms, e.g. turgidity, temperature regulation, best solvent, metabolite, etc. Cell membranes are partially permeable, and cytoplasm and cell sap contain many substances in solution. Water enters cells bathed in dilute solutions but leaves cells bathed in concentrated solutions because of osmosis. Osmosis is the diffusion of water through a partially permeable membrane, from a dilute solution of salt or sugar to a concentrated solution, because the concentrated solution contains fewer free water molecules through a partially permeable membrane. Osmosis maintains the pressure of water in plant cells to support the plant. Osmosis is the movement of water molecules from a region of higher water potential to a region of lower water potential through a partially permeable membrane. Turgid cell is water-filled cell, having turgor pressure, and flaccid cells will be plasmolyzed due to exosmosis. Turgid cells provide support for leaves and young stems. Osmosis occurs in cells because the cell membrane is partially permeable and there can be a difference between the water potential inside and outside a cell. Water is important to maintain the shape of the plant and animal cells. Cell membranes contain special carrier proteins which are used for active transport. An animal cell has no cell wall, so it can easily be damaged by water movements in and out of a cell as a result of osmosis. Animal cells are usually bathed in a solution that is isotonic to the cell contents. A plant cell has a cell wall, which can resist pressure changes due to osmotic water movement. A plant cell that has taken up water becomes turgid, while one that has lost water becomes flaccid and eventually plasmolyzed. Turgor is important in maintaining support in plants. The effects of osmosis can be seen by placing plant cells in solution with different water potentials and observing them through a microscope. The effects of osmosis can be measured by weighing plant tissues before and after immersion in solution with different water potentials. A water potential gradient is important in the uptake of water by plants. In animals, active transport is important in the uptake of glucose by cells lining the villi of the ileum. Active transport is important as it allows movement of substances across membranes against a concentration gradient. It requires energy from respiration in the form of ATP. Is important in plants for the uptake of ions by root hairs, e.g. nitrate ions, magnesium ions, etc. Reabsorption of amino acids, glucose, mineral salts, and water back into the network of capillaries surrounding coiled parts of the kidney tubules. Keywords: movement into and out of cells, diffusion, osmosis, selectively, permeable membrane, partially permeable membrane, water potential, semi-permeable membrane, impermeable membrane, turgid cell, wilted cell, plasmolyzed cell, concentration gradient, along concentration gradient, against concentration gradient, hypertonic solution, hypotonic solution, isotonic. IGCSE and O-Level Smart Biology M. Rashid Chatter 030046100457. Solution: active transport, permeable membrane, weak solution, strong solution, turgid cell, turgor pressure, plasmolysis. Glossary. Differentiation: the process by which cells become specialized in performing a particular function. Diffusion: movement of molecules of liquids and gases from regions where they are highly concentrated to osmosis: diffusion of water molecules through a semi-permeable membrane from a weak to a strong solution. Osmotic potential: the pressure with which molecules could diffuse from a solution if it was separated from another solution by a semi-permeable membrane. Plasmolysis: the shrinkage of cell cytoplasm owing to loss of water by osmosis. Turgor pressure within plant cells, which results from the absorption of water by osmosis. Wall pressure. A cell taking in water by osmosis inflates until its cellulose wall can stretch no further. The restraining force of the cell wall is called wall pressure. Short MCQs with right answers. 1. The diagram shows a test tube containing clear jelly. A drop of blue ink is injected into the middle of the jelly. The blue color of the ink spreads throughout the jelly. By which process does the blue ink spread through the jelly? Diffusion. 2. Which row describes active transport of ions? 3. The diagram shows some of the apparatus used in an osmosis investigation. In this investigation, a dialysis tubing bag was filled with sucrose solution, sealed and weighed. The dialysis tubing bag was then immersed in distilled water for 1 hour. After 1 hour, the dialysis tubing bag was removed from the beaker, the surface was dried and the bag was re-weighed. Which row explains what will happen during the investigation? IGCSE and O-Level Smart Biology M. Rashid Chatha 030046100457. 4. Which factor would decrease the rate of diffusion of oxygen into cells? Increasing thickness of cell membrane. 5. Which molecule crosses a partially permeable membrane during osmosis? Water. 6. The diagrams show the movement of particles across a membrane. The arrows show the direction of movement. Which diagram shows active transport? 7. By which process does oxygen pass out of a leaf? Diffusion. 8. A tuber from a potato plant was cut into pieces of identical length. The pieces of potato were placed in 4 different solutions for 3 hours. Which solutions will cause the pieces of potato to change in length? 1. Pure water. 2. A sugar solution that is less concentrated than the potato cell contents. 3. A sugar solution that is more concentrated than the potato cell contents. 9. Which row shows the features of active transport? 10. Which statements are correct for both diffusion and osmosis? 11. The concentration of sodium ions in the soil is lower than the concentration inside root hair cells. Which process will be used when sodium ions are taken into root hair cells from the soil? Active transport. 12. Which statement is always correct for both diffusion and osmosis? They involve the movement of particles down a concentration gradient. 13. The graph shows the effect of oxygen on the uptake of ions by 2 sets of barley plants. IGCSE and O-Level Smart Biology M. Rashid Chatha 030046100457. Except for oxygen availability, both sets of barley plants were grown in identical conditions. Which process is taking place to explain the difference between the 2 curves? Active transport. 14. Which substance do root hairs take from the soil? Water and mineral ions. 15. Water is a good solvent. What does this mean? Many substances dissolve well in it. 16. What would lead to a decrease in a diffusion rate into a cell? Thicker cell wall. 17. Which statements about diffusion are correct? 18. Some ways in which molecules may move into and out of cells are listed. 1. Molecules move from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. 2. Molecules move from a lower concentration to a higher concentration. 3. Molecules move from a higher concentration to a lower concentration across a partially permeable membrane. Which statement is correct? 1 describes diffusion, 2 describes active transport and 3 describes osmosis. 19. Which structures must be present in a cell for osmosis to take place? Cytoplasm and cell membrane. 20. The scent from a bunch of flowers spreads throughout a room. How does the scent spread? By diffusion. 21. What is not an example of active transport? Absorption of water by root hairs. 22. Which is an example of active transport? Ion uptake by root hair cells. 23. Protoplasts are plant cells that have had their cell walls removed. What happens if the plant protoplasts are placed in distilled water? They get larger and burst. 24. Which characteristics are correct for both osmosis and diffusion? Requires a partially permeable. Membrane, X, requires a concentration gradient, all energy-consuming processes, X25. Two identical cylinders, 40 mm long, are cut from a potato. One, W, is placed in water and the other, X, is placed in a concentrated sugar solution. What are the lengths of the cylinders after 2 hours? W, 42, X, 3826. A plant absorbs water and oxygen into its roots. How are these substances absorbed? Water, osmosis and oxygen, diffusion 27. During osmosis, which molecules move and through which type of membrane? Molecules moving, water and type of membrane, partially permeable 28. What describes active transport? Energy required, and particles move against concentrated gradient, 29. Which processes can only occur through a membrane? Active transport and osmosis. IGCSE and O-Level Smart Biology M. Rashid Chatha 030046100457. 30. The small intestine of a person contains a lower concentration of glucose than is present in the blood. The cells of the villi absorb glucose. By which process is the glucose absorbed? By active transport against the concentration gradient 31. Which processes are controlled by cell surface membranes? Water uptake by root hairs 32. Which liquid has the highest water potential at atmospheric pressure? Distilled water 33. Which process can take place in a root hair cell when oxygen is not available? Diffusion and osmosis only 34. Which of these processes, diffusion and osmosis, require energy from respiration? Do not require energy. 35. 4 identical pieces of potato are treated in 2 stages, as shown. Which piece of potato will be largest after 2 hours? Unboiled and placed in distilled water for 2 hours 36. Which process needs energy from respiration? Uptake of glucose by cells in the villi. 37. The mass of a cube of fresh potato is found. It is then placed in a test tube containing a dilute solution of sucrose. After an hour, its mass has increased. Which process has occurred and what has happened to the concentration of the sucrose in the solution in the test tube? Process, osmosis. Sucrose concentration, increased 38. Which processes are responsible for the uptake of ions from the soil by a plant and the uptake of glucose into the villi of a human? Active transport, for both, 39. Through which organs do carbon dioxide molecules, magnesium ions and nitrate ions enter plants? Carbon dioxide molecules, through leaves, magnesium ions, through roots and nitrate ions, through roots 40. What is an example of active transport? Movement of glucose molecules into the cells of the villi 41. Plant cells are placed in a solution with a lower water potential than that of the cells. Which row is correct? Movement of water by osmosis, leaves cells and volume of vacuole, decreases 42. Which statement is always correct when oxygen is diffusing out of a plant cell? The concentration of oxygen is higher inside the cell than outside. 43. Which substance do root hairs take from the soil? Water and mineral ions 44. Which structures must be present in a cell for osmosis to take place? Cytoplasm and cell membrane 45. What would lead to a decrease in a diffusion rate into a cell? Thicker cell wall 46. What is not an example of active transport? Absorption of water by root hairs 47. Which is an example of active transport? Ion uptake by root hair cells 48. Water is a good solvent. What does this mean? Many substances dissolve well in it. 49. Which process can involve active transport? Mineral ion intake through root hairs 50. Which statements about diffusion are correct? Molecules move at random, molecules move down a concentration gradient and molecules may move through a partially permeable membrane. 51. Which row defines active transport? Cell membrane needed, yes. Movement of ions, upper concentration gradient, respiration needed, yes. 52. A red blood cell and a palisade mesophyll